It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you?
Good. Glad to be here.
Busy week?
Every week is a busy week.
Yeah. Some are busier than others. James McCauley, Paris correspondent for The Washington Post, can attest to that. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
All right. Lisa Rubin, Paris bureau chief for The New York Times. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we want to thank as well Paul Morehoff, documentary filmmaker with production company Première Ligne. What's your next project? What are you working on right now?
I'm working on the info war between Russia and Europe.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, for Arte, but won't be on air before March, so I've got time.
You got time. Okay, still in the production phase. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag World This Week. Now, some weeks we start with a soundbite of the week or a quote of the week or an image of the week. But when you're talking about a head of state who never writes her own speeches and has never granted an interview, then you're left talking about the hat of the week. It was worn by one Elizabeth Regina, the Queen's policy speech, the centerpiece of the state opening of Parliament. Christopher Dickey, what do you make of that hat?
Well, it's clearly a stylized version of the European flag, and it's a quiet statement against Brexit. Actually, who knows? I mean, maybe she just has horrible taste and she picked that hat, you know. But the British press had a field day with it.
The British press did indeed have a field day. There was even talk that the Queen's speech would have to be postponed. There's not even sure that the contents of it are going to be approved next week.
Well, that's a whole other issue because it has to do with the weakness of Theresa May's government, her inability to get the Irish Unionist Party on board with her. She needs their handful of votes to just get over the line to a majority. And Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Party has been threatening, none too quietly, to try and vote down elements of the Queen's speech, which would basically disrupt the entire government and make it impossible, as I understand it, impossible to form the new government.
All right, it was a busy week for Theresa May. Began with the formal kickoff of Brexit negotiations and concluded with the European summit, where she sprang her opening gambit on open borders with the rest of the EU 27.
I want to reassure all those EU citizens who are in the UK, who've made their lives and homes in the UK, that no one will have to leave. We won't be seeing families split apart. This is a fair and serious offer. And I want to give those EU citizens in the UK certainty about the future of their lives. But I also want to see that certainty given to UK citizens who are living in the European Union.
All right, that reassurance only getting her so far, it seems. There's been much criticism saying it's very vague for the time being. We'll know more on Monday. Angela Merkel, who called her UK counterpart's Brexit proposals on citizens' rights a good start, but in no way a breakthrough. She's bargaining from a kind of a weak position, and yet she's trying as much as possible to still have something left in the tank, Theresa May.
She is. It's interesting to see. On the European side, I mean, they've been extremely generous for British citizens residing in continental Europe. Even floating like lifetime guarantees for benefits, all of that. But on the other side, it doesn't really match up to the same degree. And just from a pure bargaining perspective, you wonder how that sort of plays out, because the leverage is not necessarily in London, certainly not in any kind of strong way.
The leverage is not in London right now. How should the Europeans play their hand? Like we saw jokes made, like Donald Tusk saying, "If you guys want to reconsider, it's not too late." These kinds of noises. Is that the right way to go about things at this point when you're faced with politicians who've clearly said we can't go back on this promise?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Mrs. May or Prime Minister May is in a very difficult position because domestically she's kind of in a rather considerable pinch. She doesn't have much wiggle room anymore. Certainly not after the recent election, which really the election in Britain, which sort of undermines her own credibility and her control on things vis-a-vis Brexit, especially. Many said that it was a rejection of the hard Brexit that we had anticipated, and that it's citizens saying, no, now we must have a softer Brexit. So it really, I'm not really sure what she can do at this point.
Citizens saying you should have a softer Brexit, and Europeans saying, how about no Brexit at all? Of course, the star of the summit wasn't Theresa May. Undoubtedly, France's new president, Emmanuel Macron, who went to Brussels with the wind in his sails after a landslide win in legislative elections and a reinforced grip on power within his own cabinet. That cabinet that sidelined big names from coalition partners from the centrist Modem party. They're in the throes of a corruption scandal. We can talk about that a little bit more later. Paul Moreira, the Financial Times had a headline, French swagger is back. your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we all... I'm at least a bit surprised by this thing that Macron has of, speaking bluntly to Putin, arriving in Europe and being a little bit boastful of his victory, or at least in his attitude. But I think that is really what's at stake with Europe. Is he going to be able to keep his promises, like fiscal harmony, trying to avoid the tax evasion that the big corporations have been succeeding on doing in under European soil by going through Luxembourg or the Netherlands? Is he going to succeed on rolling back on the detached workers law? All of this is going to be what is going to be judged on, and so we'll see if he keeps swaggering after.
Yeah, we'll see if he keeps swaggering. How much swagger can he keep for how long? We saw this joint press conference with Angela Merkel to conclude the summit where they talked about reciprocity on trade, sort of pointing the finger both at Donald Trump and at the Chinese.
Well, I think he does feel that there has to be some sort of very strong pan-European stand against competition. So he's an odd combination almost of a kind of wanting a protectionist sort of Europe, but at the same time... Protection, right, because it's protecting people who are feeling battered by globalization, but not, for instance, that Louis Vuitton is now going to be producing things, and I can't remember whether it's Romania or Bulgaria, but that kind of intra-European movement of jobs he's not said very much about. So
is there a shift in your view, or right now is it,
it's very
a bit
hard.
of theater?
It's very hard to tell how much of it is theater. He doesn't want to look like he's willing to give in to the Chinese completely. On the other hand, he certainly would want Chinese investments here. So, and I imagine he also doesn't want the Chinese to get ahead of the French on the climate agreement. He needs the Chinese, but he'd like them to always be right there next to Angela Merkel.
I think a lot of this is theater, but I think the theater is extremely important. I mean, the real test, as Paul was saying, the real test is before us. It's in front of us. And actually, it isn't going to be so much about protectionism and the big European issues that we're talking about right now. The test is going to be in the streets this fall as he tries to push through his labor reforms and his education reforms and the kinds of things that traditionally bring hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people into the streets of France to negate. If he can do that, then he can move ahead strongly on a lot of different fronts. But in order to do that, and you can see him capitalizing on this already, he has to convince people that France has a new lease on life, that it has new confidence, that it has a new position in the world, because the French really do like that. The French would love to be able to swagger more, and to the extent that they feel they can with Macron as president, he'll have a better chance pushing those kinds of policies.
I've heard that a lot, Paul. That no matter what, okay, yeah, honeymoon period, fine. Just wait till the strikes and the demonstrations begin.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, France has a tradition of resisting in the streets. It's in the DNA of this country. But I think probably the most interesting event in terms of placing Macron in the international chessboard is probably the interview he gave to 8 European dailies, where it's really striking. I mean, it's total change of position, shifting of position, like towards Russia, towards Syria. He is advocating getting closer to Russia, to hit harder on the Islamists in Syria. Is advocating to shift away from the neoconservative trend that was running the planet. So it's a very strong statement, and I think it has been slightly overlooked so far.
In that same interview where he talks about Europe not being a supermarket, he hit hard at countries like Hungary and Poland over the way they don't meet their refugee quotas or respect human rights. There was a meeting this Friday with leaders of four East European nations that almost got canceled because of that interview.
I mean, the refugee situation is very interesting to follow, isn't it? Because, of course, in France itself, the issue has not gone away. And, of course, maybe on a smaller scale, but there's still Calais, which, that's it's still a problem. It still has gotten a lot of attention, and as of late, little has been done. I mean, there have been calls. I think there's supposed to be some kind of plan placed in 2 weeks.
The Interior Minister's promised one in 2 weeks.
Something like that. But the point is, I mean, it's early days, and we don't really know how that will play out domestically. The thing that I wonder about all of this is, you say the theater is very important, and I agree. But I think we have all read many of these articles, and maybe even written some of them, about how Macron's victory represents this ascendance. It's a watershed moment in French politics, and it's a new party. It's a supermajority for this sort of muscular radical center, however you want to call it. But it's interesting to look, though, isn't it, about the composition of his government, and how in certain ways it can be interpreted. I mean, again, it's early, we don't know, but it sometimes looks like a government of Les Républicains, or a conservative government, or a neoliberal
So you're
government.
trying to figure out whether he's right wing or left wing.
Well, I don't know if it's that. I mean, it's the theater is important, and yes, it's this grand sort of assertion of French goodwill and French swagger, however you want to phrase it, on the world stage. But I mean, domestically, I'm not really sure that it's a huge break from the status.
No, it's not. I mean, I think
as you
we've said that any number of times. He's not a huge break from the status quo. He is the status quo. He's the status quo if the status quo is the center. So if we're going to talk about Les Républicains, it's not only that there are a lot of Républicains in his government, there are also a lot of people who are still part of Les Républicains who say openly that they want to work with him and work closely with him. Raffarin, former prime minister, is saying, yes, I want to work with him. There's another wing of the party, which we will kindly describe as the catho-fascio wing, that doesn't want to work with him. Just like on the socialist side, which socialists have been virtually destroyed. But one reason for that is that there was a whole Trotskyite wing of the party that was always an obstacle to whatever the socialists wanted to do.
The socialists weren't as destroyed as we thought they would be, though, in the end.
Well, 30 seats when you've been the government, I think that's pretty bad.
Plus all of the other leftist parties together. I mean, it's not.
Oh, because you think Mélenchon is going to get along so
well?
well?
I just mean it's not. I'm not sure that you can say that the left is just dead so far.
Has France's political landscape been redrawn or not? Then.
I think we'll have to see if it's been redrawn so that you actually get change. What has happened over the last 3 presidencies is each time there's been a real effort at change, whether there were certain things under Chirac, then Sarkozy, and then Hollande, that were basically stymied by people pouring into the streets. And while yes, they managed to get a law passed sort of by hook and by crook using special parliamentary procedures under Hollande. It was a watered-down version. So now we're going to come back and try to do the stronger version. And we'll see if Macron has made people believe enough, use the theater, as Chris said, and make people feel proud enough that they're willing to take a risk. And I don't know that people are going to feel that way. There's been a little more growth recently, a little, the unemployment has gone down, but fractionally. I don't know if that's enough.
Yeah, my feeling is, I agree with you. My feeling is that it's not that different what he's planning to do from the Loi El Khomri law, the work law that
The last labor bill.
Yeah, it stemmed a lot of demonstration in the streets. It's just one level above, but it was basically on this field. But I have the feeling that Macron's victory is more the victory. The real change is the faces of people. No? They're younger, more women, and ideologically, there's no difference really. I mean, anyway, the right and the left have dissolved already before, even though there was this kind of theater of right and left, but we all knew that there was not much difference between the Socialist Party and Les Républicains for a long while now, almost 20 years since Mitterrand, basically.
Let me ask everybody else. I think, as I look for an analogy with Macron, that if I really look to who he resembles, maybe it's de Gaulle. Physically, youth-wise, no, not at all. But in the sense that he comes in as a radical force, pulling together a lot of different people who want some kind of change, it seems to me that he is a lot like de Gaulle. And I also think he's also very authoritarian like de Gaulle. I think that's something that people haven't looked at very closely with him. Whether we're talking about the institutionalization of the emergency laws, or we're just talking about his general manner. He's very authoritarian.
It's a surprise. Because he wasn't conveying that type of attitude before.
I think he's changed a great deal now that he's in office, and he's been willing to go much further in that direction.
And as somebody who went to the best high civil servant schools, he knows how to work the state and work the high civil service.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing, building on your earlier point, is that one thing we haven't mentioned yet is, what kind of mandate really does he have? I mean, so will the people, you mentioned, like, will the people get on board with the change he's proposing? Well, I mean, turnout was at a record low for both, the tours of the Législatif. So, I mean, it really does suggest, either a kind of a disaffection or apathy, or I don't know how to interpret that exactly. But, it is very symbolic, as you say, that there is this unusual for France diversity of faces, gender parity in the En Marche ticket. But, during the election, I know this was widely reported on, but, many French minorities preferred Mélenchon to Macron. There's I'm not sure that a lot of people see much potential for him in change in those communities, and the proposed institutionalization of the state of emergency into common law. I mean, that for somebody who's so nominally committed to racial diversity, gender parity, I mean, that it's quite surprising for many. I mean, and this week,
it's a strange mix.
It is a strange, kind of bizarre contrast, because for so many, I mean, the state of emergency, I mean, it has very clear connotations. I mean, it comes from Algeria. I mean, it was devised in 1955. It was what authorized the infamous 1961 massacre in Paris, that when the protesters were beaten and thrown into the Seine, I mean, they were violating the curfew imposed by the state of emergency. So this, I mean, it has a really clear legal precedent that doesn't seem to fit with the rest of his mission.
Right, so there's the policy, and there's this winning of the center that Paul Moreira was talking about. When we come back, we're going to see whether or not there are lessons that can be learned on the other side of the Atlantic. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey is the foreign editor there. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to James Macaulay, Paris correspondent for The Washington Post. Elisa Rubin, Paris bureau chief for The New York Times. And Paul Moreira, documentary filmmaker with production company Première Ligne. Last week, we contrasted Emmanuel Macron's success with the floundering of Theresa May's Conservatives in Britain. This week, the French president can be compared perhaps with what's happening to the opposition Democrats in the United States, where after a by-election in the suburbs of Atlanta saw their candidate win just 48% of the vote, nearly a win in the first round, and still somehow lose the runoff. Well, a lot of people are sending out tweets like this one. In the wake of Ossoff's defeat in Georgia, the Democrats ought to start learning from Macron, the leader of the House of Representatives, by the way, having to fend off calls for her own head.
I feel very confident in the support that I have in my caucus. No, my timing is not about them. My comments is about the issues that we're here to fight, and we're fighting right now on the health care bill.
Your thoughts when you see what's happening inside the Democratic Party? Because we say, oh yeah, Donald Trump is really unpopular, but the Republicans seem to win every by-election.
Well, first of all, there's a Politics 101, right? Which is all politics is local. And part of the problem with Ossoff is he came in and he was perceived as an outsider in the 6th District of Georgia. So that was
48% in the first round.
yes, but it was a wildly divided Republican field too. So once we had a straightforward Republican contender and we had Ossoff, then you had people voting, who do we really want? That's been a Republican stronghold since the 1970s. So I don't think it's really that surprising that Ossoff would lose.
And to that viewer's comment that we need to start learning from Macron.
Well, two things. First of all, the whole idea that a by-election is going to be a referendum on the President of the United States is misleading. Sometimes they are, but usually they're not. Secondly, when it comes to Macron, what exactly does that tweet mean? I think there's a lot that can be learned from Macron, but I'm not sure how it relates to the 6th District of Georgia.
Elisa Rubin?
Well, there was also, I think, quite a bit of feeling from more left-leaning Democrats of the Bernie Sanders persuasion, who felt like Ossoff should have gone much further left. But I have trouble believing that
haven't spent much time in Georgia, I think.
that would have worked. I think it would have been a difficult lift. That said, so far the Democrats have not been able to win any by-election, and they are going to have to find a way to start winning elections.
In part one of our discussion, Paul Moreira said there's, this sterile left versus right divide in France was found out. In the United States, is there a room for a new kind of center?
Well, there's room for it, but whether there's anybody who could actually lead it and create it, I think is the issue.
Yeah, if I may. I mean, I think that if you want to draw certain lessons from Macron, one is new faces are more important than new ideas. That is what is revolutionary about him, his youth and his face, and the fact that people didn't really know who he was and that he seemed to come out of nowhere. Secondly, you're not going to build a centrist movement that can take power unless you destroy all or part of the traditional parties. That's the second point. Third point, you got to know where the center is. At least the candidate and the people who's leading that movement has to have a clear idea. It can't just be not left, not right. It has to be, this is where we want to go. If you can combine all those elements, then you have a good chance, maybe, of building a muscular, great word that you used, a muscular centrist movement. But we don't see any new faces yet.
Yeah, and I would say I agree. I think one of the things that is sort of often misunderstood, I feel, in about Macron overseas, is that there's very little ideologically about what he has proposed that is new. I mean, this is very much a French third way. I mean, like you compared him to de Gaulle earlier, which I can certainly see, but you could also say that he is a French Tony Blair
or Bill Clinton.
Yeah, or Bill Clinton. And we've just come off of a presidential election in the U.S. where a similar version of this centrist sort of ideology, fiscal a Democrat, yes, but fiscally conservative Democrat, social liberal, it was rejected. So I mean, I'm not sure that as you say, the ideas of Macron are really at all what is at stake here.
Actually, the editor of the Daily Beast today is arguing that the place where you could find the center of gravity for this centrist movement might actually be in the Republican Party, among the Romney Republicans, the reasonable Republicans, even the George W. Bushes, the people who saw themselves as the rock-hard, mainstream conservative element of the Republican Party, which has completely been betrayed by Trump and by the people, the Tea Party movement that has sort of ushered him in.
A couple of reactions, one on the hashtag F24debate. If the Democrats do not come back to the center soon, they may be obsolete for a long time. Another precinct heard from on this matter, Donald Trump's Twitter feed. Here's what he had to say. I certainly hope the Democrats do not force Nancy Pelosi, out. That would be very bad for the Republican Party, and please let Crying Chuck stay. That Charles Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader. Moving on. It's a cabinet reshuffle that could define the destiny of a nation for decades to come. The King of Saudi Arabia promoting 31-year-old Mohammed bin Salman from Deputy Crown Prince to Crown Prince. Unknown till 2 years ago, he's already in charge of plans to sell a small portion of the all-powerful state oil company Aramco and of defense, which most notably means he's the one who prosecutes the war in Yemen. We could show you an image after this announcement of him kissing the hand and the arm of his predecessor, Prince Nayef, who has been sidelined. Paul Moreira, what was your reaction when you saw this?
Well, I think there's something that we as journalists should really insist upon is what Saudi Arabia is doing to Yemen right now. I mean, Yemen has turned into a black hole of this planet, and we all know what comes out of black holes, and we have been paying a very hard price for overlooking that. And I mean, I must say that if they're tightening their grip, if they being more radicalized. They're also buying 110 billion worth of weapons from the United States, and they're going to use those weapons on civilian populations in Yemen. If you're a journalist, it's absolutely impossible to get a visa to try to know what's happening in Yemen. And I think it's really an emergency now that we can enter this country and be able to witness what's going on. There's a huge cholera epidemic. There are civilians being bombed daily, and it's really important that we can get into Yemen now.
Yeah, the UN saying that cholera epidemic could hit 300,000 people by August.
It's a very, I mean, to say it's a terrible situation is just a vast understatement. And I think what we've really not focused on is that there are several proxy wars developing in the Middle East. And Yemen is the one that's most full-blown between Iran and Saudi. But I think if you look at northern Iraq, where you, again, have an awful lot of Iranian interests that are now coming into tension with both Turkey and with Sunnis who are indirectly funded by the Gulf or by Saudi, you're looking at a very, very dangerous situation, and not a lot of leadership interested in the rest of the world in dealing with it.
Not a lot of leadership interested in the rest of the world, except neighboring states, except Saudi Arabia, except Iran.
Participants who are now really sort of manipulating. I mean, you know, without the weapons, without their attacks, there wouldn't be anything like the crisis in Yemen. It would have been a much more localized civil strife.
Right now, there's one that's not a full-blown war, but it is a crisis, the one with Qatar. It sounds, one of the things that has been mentioned is that Prince Nayef was sidelined, they say, for striking a conciliatory tone on Qatar. The decision by Saudi Arabia to have that land and air blockade on the Emirates, well, it's creating mixed messages now out of Washington. When the crisis broke out, Donald Trump tweeted his support of the Saudis. Earlier this week, though, the State Department seemed to put out the opposite message.
Now that it's been more than 2 weeks since the embargo started, we are mystified that the Gulf states have not released to the public, nor to the Qataris, the details about the claims that they are making toward Qatar. The more the time goes by, the more doubt is raised about the actions taken by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. At this point, we are left with one simple question. Were the actions really about their concerns regarding Qatar's alleged support for terrorism, or were they about the long-simmering grievances between and among the GCC countries?
Couldn't be any clearer.
Couldn't be any clearer, and she couldn't be any more right. Look, what is the most important demand about Qatar? What is the thing the Saudis really want, and the Egyptians and the Bahrainis? They want to get rid of Al Jazeera. That's what they want. Since the 1990s, Al Jazeera has been an independent voice, or seemingly independent voice, heavily critical of the Saudis, heavily critical of the status quo regimes all over the Arab world, and hugely popular. And they want to cut it off. That's what they want to do. Really, this is all about Jazeera. It's not about terrorism. Even when they talk about terrorism, they're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And the grievance against Al Jazeera, one of them, is that it wound up being very supportive of the Muslim Brotherhood when the Brotherhood was trying to run Egypt. So for all those reasons, they want to take out Qatar. They want to make Qatar bend the knee. They want to drive it literally down to the ground.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's more, it has to do with Al Jazeera and the Muslim Brotherhood that has been really annoying for the Saudis and both and the Egyptians. And recently, I was able to interview a prominent fighter in the Syrian revolution, a guy called Jamal Marouf, who was like leading literally an army from the Free Syrian Army near Idlib. He was chased by the Islamists. He's now in Turkey, and he was explaining in details to me how he saw Gulf money coming into the revolution. And he was actually telling me about a guy called Abu Abdelaziz al-Qatari. He was called al-Qatari, so everyone thought it was Qatari. It was actually Palestinian, born in Iraq, and managing some money from rich businessmen from Qatar. And I think that's the reality. I don't think the Qatari state, and at least there is no concrete evidence whatsoever about that. I don't think they really finance directly the Islamists. But guys with private interests were channeling some money into the Syrian revolution.
And if we're talking about financing Islamists, the Saudis finance Islamists all over the world. And their play in the Middle East after the Arab Spring began was not to support democratic forces. Why would they do that? So they can bring them home to Saudi Arabia? Oh, hell no. No. They supported the Salafi movements because they thought that would be a kind of a barrier against the Al-Qaeda movement that wants the overthrow of the Saudi regime. And they thought it would undermine the leftists and the democratic forces. So they're supporting the Salafis there. They were supporting the Salafis in Syria as well.
Yeah, covering the fast-evolving balance of power in the region can be, by the way, a deadly task, and we found that out this week. French reporters shaken up by the death of freelance journalist Stéphane Villeneuve and his Iraqi-Kurdish journalist and fixer Bakhtiar Haddad, who had sought refuge in France back in 2007, who had since returned. 3 other reporters critically hurt when their vehicle hit a landmine in Mosul, and this happening as the battle to finally reclaim Mosul is still playing out, Paul Moreira.
Absolutely, and I must say that Stéphane was a friend of mine. I traveled half of the planet with him. I work in Kappa, which is a major new TV agency, with him for 5 years. So I was a friend. I knew Bakhtiar also. It was known by all the French-speaking journalists in Iraq and northern Iraq. From what I know, they walked back alone from a fire zone, and they stepped on a mine. They were not driving; they were walking. And well, basically, we know that the Islamic State has been quite strong and very effective in planting all those improvised explosive devices everywhere, and it's very dangerous terrain now to go to.
I mean, I think that's right. I think even if we've had people almost blown up, and there's a whole series of layers of different booby traps and. As well as still many suicide bombers. After all, the remaining remaining fighters in Mosul kind of feel they have nothing left to lose. They're likely going to be killed, and so they're quite willing to take all kinds of risks. And I think they've laced the city with these IEDs. So you'd have to be very experienced to pick it out, and even then you might not.
Yeah,
so it's a terrible, terrible terrain to be working in.
This nothing left to lose feeling was certainly what local residents told us in Raqqa. France 24's James Andre is there right now, and here's what they told him.
We've experienced terror you can't imagine. Bombs fell like pebbles, like rain. Our neighbors have died. Abu Bandar and his family have all been blown to pieces. There were body parts everywhere. Another neighbor was hit in the head by debris and died on the spot.
People said that the Kurds are coming, and I went out to see. The Daesh sniper aimed at me. I felt the bullet pass through me. I stooped. A second bullet hit me. 2 bullets. Look, the second one went in here. I stitched myself.
Yeah, James Macaulay, this feeling that it's getting more and more brutal as it comes towards the end, both in Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria. And then it's getting increasingly volatile with, as ISIS's reign recedes, you suddenly find the different protagonists that Elisa was mentioning earlier in each other's path. And we saw that U.S. Air Force jets shoot down a Syrian plane last Sunday.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of unbelievable to watch the situation unfold in all of these various directions. I mean, I don't know what kind of context I can provide other than that. I mean, it's...
Well, I think one of the things that's happening in Raqqa, as we reported this week, is that basically American air power and artillery is going in there, and it's like Russian strategy. They just level whole parts of the city, and then that allows the Kurdish-led forces to move in with a minimal loss of casualties. Fine that they lose minimal casualties, but what you were hearing in that report, what is she saying? She said, we heard the Kurds were coming. Sure, after the whole neighborhood had been leveled exactly the way it was described, then they hear the Kurds are going to come in.
And the other point that I think must be stressed is that it's true the Kurds are doing most of the job in Raqqa, and they are being pressured towards the west in Manbij by the Turkish army. The Turkish army has now tanks on the ground, and their worst nightmare is that the Kurds make a junction from Kobane to Afrin, and then have a whole like stripe of Kurdish land that would become the next independent Kurdistan, and they really fear that, so they fight the Kurds very heavily.
So there's the Turkish pressure on the one side, and we saw that there was the U.S. taking out drones near the borders with Iraq and Jordan inside Syria this week. This to stop Iranian militias from going through to the south. There seems to be this scramble for Syria.
The scramble for Syria, but also I think at the same time we're hearing a lot of different powers saying that they're willing to, in some measure, live with Assad. So I'm not sure where this ends up. What will be Syria at the end? Will there be a section that will be largely Kurdish? Will there be another area that is got a little bit more of a democratic mix because ISIS couldn't get it and Assad can't? Assad is trying to make sure that doesn't happen.
And you can't really separate Syria from Iraq anymore.
Right.
I mean, one of the things that's going on is that the Iranian militias, Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, are doing their damnedest to open a corridor that will be effectively a land corridor from Iran into Syria for the support of Assad. So you have this wild situation where the U.S. is essentially in bed with the people who are opening a land corridor from Iran into Syria, while it says it also wants the downfall of Assad.
I have the feeling that basically Assad has won. I've been following this situation for a while. I've begun in Syria in 2011 to meet the beginning of the revolution. And I recently went to see the guys I was with in 2011, and they say themselves, our revolution has been confiscated. And when really you see that they only can survive in Turkey, that they were the moderate forces. There are no more moderate forces. Macron recently in this interview that he gave to 8 dailies, European dailies,
He said, show me the replacement.
Right. Our interest as France is not to support the insurgency. Our interest is to support Bashar al-Assad and then to push for a negotiation, him with the opposition. And I think it's a real sign that, no, Bashar has won. Now it has to evolve into something else. But
He's won what's left.
he's won the ruins. Yeah.
We're going to have to leave it there for now. I want to thank you, Paul Moreira. I want to thank as well James McCauley, Elisa Rubin, Christopher Dickey. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
And it's June, so we go to Glastonbury, to the music festival.
Some of us do, yes. Some of us just watch from the comfort of our armchair because, frankly, it's a bit more sensible. But there's been controversy already. The music only getting underway there today. But Johnny Depp rolled into town, bringing with him a whole heap of controversy. Normally, the most outrageous thing about this music festival in Somerset is probably the price of beer and the state of the portable toilets. I speak from experience.
And the mud when it rains, but...
Oh, yes, the mud's terrible too, and that's probably going to happen this weekend.
Okay.
But yes, Johnny Depp was in town, and he spoke to a group of around 1,500 people who'd gone along to watch one of his old movies. He spoke up on stage, and it's a kind of drive-in thing, which apparently is called Cineramageddon, where you can sit in vintage vehicles and watch old movies. Some of the people started to ask him questions. One of them said to him, "Say what you want," and he took them at their word. Take a listen to what he had to say.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president? I want to clarify, I'm not an actor. I lie for a living.
So there you go.
It's creepy, the cheering for that.
Yes. Well, I think you can probably say this was a very ill-advised joke about relating to the assassination, obviously, of Abraham Lincoln, which was by an actor back in 1865. John Wilkes Booth was his name. And, of course, he's talking to a British crowd. The likelihood of a British crowd knowing that the assassin of Lincoln was an actor is pretty small. And you do actually see almost a little look of panic and confusion as Johnny Depp hears all that cheering and realises what that's going to mean in terms of headlines. The sound quality isn't great. So, yes, what he said was, when was the last time an actor assassinated a president? It's been a while, and maybe it is time. Now, unsurprisingly, there's been a huge backlash from Donald Trump's supporters. Johnny Depp, short for Johnny Deplorable, which I actually think is quite a clever response there. This Twitter user alerting the Secret Service to this one because, of course, Kathy Griffin, the comedian, when she held up a bloodied, beheaded version of Donald Trump's head for a photograph, there was vilification of her. Claims from the White House that Baron Trump had seen the image and was upset by it. And she was then investigated by the Secret Service. So this GOP stalwart saying that the same should happen to Johnny Depp. This Twitter user says, for a guy who reportedly beats up women and is a drunk, Johnny Depp should keep his mouth shut. Now, a lot of people also pointing out that the timing of this is particularly unfortunate, to say the least. Wife-beater Johnny Depp calls for Trump's assassination, while Steve Scalise is still in the hospital. He is disgusting and mentally ill, referring, of course, to Johnny Depp, not Steve Scalise, who is now in a fair condition, but he's still in hospital having been shot. So, yes, the timing of this is particularly ill thought through. To make a quip about assassinating the president after what happened to Scalise, you have to either be an idiot, Johnny Depp, or both, says this Twitter user. But some of the condemnation is coming from people who say that they are fans of Johnny Depp. As a lifelong Johnny Depp fan, this person says, dedicated opponent of Trump as well, but they are still saying this is bad enough to make me swear off him. And another comment in a similar vein, dear Johnny Depp, while I find Trump disgusting, nauseating and hate what he's doing, I would never wish for his or any other leader's murder. Now, the other thing to mention on this is that the White House has reacted. There's been no tweet from Donald Trump. He's not addressing this directly. But there has been a statement from the White House, which Variety has been reporting on. President Trump has condemned violence in all forms, and it's sad that others like Johnny Depp have not followed his lead.
Just a word on what we've seen in central Paris this Friday.
Yes, absolutely. Paris has been going Olympics crazy. It is Olympic Day, which is an international thing. But of course, Paris is in the running for hosting the 2024 Games. Its only rival is Los Angeles, so it's really been going all out to show what Paris can do. They were prepared for a very hot one, although the temperatures have dropped. That's the scene in Les Invalides, where you had water coolers. Anne Hidalgo really trying to promote the international appeal.
The mayor of Paris.
Absolutely. Tweeting in English. And of course, the campaign for the Games in 2024 was widely mocked and criticised because its motto was actually made for sharing. Done in English, some French people unhappy about it, others felt it sounded like it was advertising pizza. But there have been some great scenes to see in Paris today. The Arc de Triomphe tweeting, urging people to come along. And my favourite, I think, is this one from Renaud Lavillenie, who was amazing the crowds, and what a fabulous sportsman he is.
That's right. Olympic pole vaulter. Many thanks, Emma James, for that. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.